We are here talking about the awards for excellence in sustainability. My name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a principal planner with RHI, or Roadside and Harwell, and I'm based in Alexandria, Virginia. Today, I'm representing the Sustainable Communities Division of the APA, and we're hosting today's webinar. And this is our first webinar celebrating our 2022 award winners, but we're also going to be talking today about the 2023 awards that are open now for nominations. So you'll hear in a bit from Tom Jacobs representing the Kansas City Regional Climate Action Plan, which won last year's State or Regional Plan Award. And I'll give you a little intro for him in a second. Any questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the Q&A, or I'll check if the chat is enabled, but you're welcome to share any questions as we go along. And I will be recording this. With the holidays, we'll have a smaller crew today than maybe sometimes, but we will record it and we'll be sharing it with everyone to view later. Always want to acknowledge our division sponsors before I get too far into this. So thanks to everyone who's helped us put on events, webinars, awards, all the things we do. We are just starting a new sponsorship year, so if anyone's interested, I'd invite you to reach out to Carla Ivanbach. Her email is at the bottom of the slide here. But you want to acknowledge all of our sponsors. So this year, for our 2022 sponsors, you can see them all here. We have Boston University, Burton Planning Services, Clarion, CREA Affiliates, Devon's Enterprise Commission, Dewberry, Emmenbach Consulting, Environmental Partners, Aaron L. DDPA, FAR Associates, HAF, Planning Communities, Smith Group, HESCA, Trunk Branch Twig Bud, the University of Florida Department of Urban and Regional Planning, the University of Utah Department of City and Metropolitan Planning, Urban Works, Visser Consulting Group, and VHB. So thank you again to all of our sponsors and to all of our division members. We'd invite anyone participating live today or who watches the recording to reach out if you're interested in volunteering with the division, or if you want to share ideas for other webinars or activities, feel free to reach out to us using the contact info here. We've got a lot of different activities going on, including planning for the upcoming National Planning Conference in Philadelphia. So before I pass it off to Tom Jacobs to talk about his award-winning project, I do want to talk a bit about this year's awards for excellence in sustainability. Last year, as you might recall, if you're familiar with the awards, last year we had updated all of our awards categories and several pieces of the awards program. And so this year we're following last year's awards format. And so if you look at the packet, you'll see it's similar, but I'll walk through it a bit. This is actually our 10th annual awards program this year. So we're excited to be celebrating 10 years of awards. The deadline for this year is January 13th at midnight. So there's still, a bit of time to submit. We do have, of course, an information packet on the website with more information, but if you've looked at the awards in previous years, it's very similar. There's a web form you can complete. We've got several different types of resources for you on the website. As I mentioned, we're using the same set of categories as last year. You can read them here. There's 8 categories, including 3 sort of different levels, different scales of planning categories, so state or regional plan, community-wide plan, and sub-area plan, sort of biggest, slightly smaller size, and then the smallest scale is the sub-area plan. And then we also have several sort of topic-specific categories as well in there. So we encourage anyone who's interested to take a look at the packet and let me know if you have any questions. As noted, the deadline is January 13th of next year. Yeah, good luck to anyone who submits. But now on to our main event for today. Unfortunately, one of our speakers is ill, but we are lucky to have Tom Jacobs here from MARC to speak with us about the Kansas City Regional Climate Action Plan. By way of a brief introduction, I'll let Tom give some more if he would like to, but Tom has 30 years of experience working in Kansas City and internationally at the intersection of sustainable community development and natural resource management. He's worked for MARC, which is the Mid-America Regional Council, for nearly 25 years and has been the Director of Environmental Programs since 2001. And in this position, he oversees regional climate policy, planning initiatives, including co-leading the development of the Regional Climate Action Plan for Metro Kansas City. So we'll have a Q&A sort of at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to send questions through the Q&A portal at any time. We might ask some questions throughout as well. That being said, Tom, I will pass it off to you at this point. Oh, you are muted.
Of course, I was muted.
There you go.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for inviting me to do this today. And we were honored, of course, to receive the award from APA. And it's a pleasure to share a little bit about our work. Since we're a small group, if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me anytime. The chattier this is, maybe the more fun it will be. I'll walk us through the plan and just give you a little bit of a sense of what we did and where we're going from here. There's a lot of climate planning that's taking place around the country, of course, right? And so MARC isn't particularly unique in any ways. And so I probably won't spend a lot of time digging into the details of the plan because I don't really think it's that unique, right? We all want more solar and more energy efficiency and more transit-oriented development. We want healthy watersheds and healthy communities, right? This is sort of the lifeblood of what we all work on as planners. So, but there's some things in Kansas City that are a little bit unique, and I'll highlight those, and maybe that'll provide some grist for the mill for conversation after. I think the most important thing to comment at the beginning is, well, first, MARC is the regional and metropolitan planning organization for Kansas City. So we're a metro of 2 million people, 9 counties, 119 municipalities. Actually, for this plan, we brought in Douglas County, where Lawrence, Kansas is. So we added a 10th county and the municipalities therein. So we're accustomed to dealing with regional planning on a lot of different issues, transportation, hazard mitigation, air quality, green infrastructure, watershed management, affordable housing, lots of different things. And in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do with this climate action plan is create a big umbrella to figure out how do we tie stuff together to look for ever more elegant solutions, whether at a policy level, at a planning level, at a programmatic or project level. And there's lots of those kinds of opportunities. We wrote this plan during the pandemic, so most of our process was online. I'm sitting in the corner of my living room in front of my laptop where I probably hosted, I don't know, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 Zoom meetings with folks from all corners of my metro area. And Karen Clausen, who is unable to join us, and I, together with many, many others, put this plan together. We believe we had more than 1,000 people involved in the development of this plan, and so it was really exciting. And at the end of the day, our stakeholders wanted this plan to be as aspirational as possible. So that's reflected by the net zero region by 2050, which is admittedly ambitious, but probably doable, contingent on many different factors from markets to technology to political leadership and more. In Kansas City, I think 4 years ago, there was a new nonprofit that was born called Climate Action KC. And it was born of 2 young elected officials, one the mayor of Roland Park, Kansas, and the other a council member in the suburb of Shawnee, Kansas, who were incredibly motivated for different reasons to work on climate. And they hosted a meeting on a Saturday morning in December about 4 years ago in a church basement. Over 100 people came, and since then the organization evolved, and they provided extraordinary leadership for all of this. But for Climate Action KC, our board of directors may not have supported the launch of this plan or the adoption of our plan, which happened in March of last year. The Climate Action KC includes a network of over 100 local elected officials actually not just local, because it includes members of our federal delegation and state elected leadership. We believe that there's representation from 10 different levels of elected office. It could be school boards, water boards, city councils, county commissions, and so on. And this cadre of folks, led by Mayor Mike Kelly and Council Member Lindsey Constance, really provided an incredible point for grassroots mobilization and political leadership that enabled our plan to get where it needed to go. And I think of everything I could say, that's probably the most distinctive thing that happened in our community. There's some kind of guiding elements here in this plan. Here's a picture of a white oak, which might live to be 350 years, which is ballpark 7th generation, right? It's a capstone or a keystone species in our in the Midwest, and it's reflective of the long-range spirit that in which we conduct our plan. So there were a few guiding principles that we began with. And the first is, so much of what we need to do, we want to do anyways. So if we look at anybody's comprehensive plan of our member communities, everybody talks about quality of life and public health and environmental quality. We all like parks. We all like trees. We all like to avoid flood risks or dirty air. So we're so much of what we need to do, we want to do anyways. In this picture, you see Mayor Kelly talking with a gentleman named Richard Mabian, who's from Wyandotte County in Kansas City, Kansas. And he's actually now serving on the EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Board. And it's worth commenting on Richard and on that topic, particularly because of all the comments that we received in the development of our plan, far and away the most important and the most prominent was the need and the imperative to frame this plan from a social equity and environmental justice perspective. So we tried to do that however we could, and we believe that, the 80 or so strategies in our plan, fully half of them or more are framed from an EJ perspective. We've already proven we can do this. So I said our plan really isn't that different from anybody else's. We all have green, energy efficient buildings. Solar isn't new anymore. We've got buses that run down the streets and rain gardens and stream restoration projects and more. And so we've already proven we can do this. So our challenge really is to figure out how we go faster and how we scale up. And that, so I know how to plant a tree, but I don't know how to make the urban forest healthy and sustainable. I know how to plant a rain garden or restore a section of a creek, but getting a healthy watershed in an urban condition is incredibly challenging, right? We have public transportation systems, but how do we get from a space where maybe 15% of our region's population can get to a job in any part of our metro in under 90 minutes, which is where we are today, to having something that really provides for better transportation access and mobility. So this question of scale is really front and center. As leadership comes from all of us, one of the things that was really important and was the first recommendation in our plan was to create a new regional collaborative structure. Just in September of this year, we launched a new regional policy committee at Mid-America Regional Council that we call our Climate and Environment Council. And we tried as hard as we could to have as diverse representation in that group as possible to help drive change. But we recognize that implementation requires leadership at all levels, from a household to a neighborhood or community to a watershed to a city, county, region, state, federal, of course. And so we're, in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is configure creative collaborations to help drive change. And finally, do no harm, right? The Hippocratic Oath, right? Every doctor says they want to do no harm. And in this case, doing nothing is in fact harmful. So this is what we use to set up our plan. And let me just take a breath and see if anybody has any questions. All right, I'll proceed. Feel free to jump in or put a question in the chat, and Jenny will help moderate that. So there were two analytical elements we did on the front end of our project. The first was a greenhouse gas inventory, and the second was a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. The inventory, of course, helps drive mitigation actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the climate risk and vulnerability assessment is more on the adaptation side of the equation. The headline from the inventory is that about a third of our emissions come from transportation and just over 60% come from using energy in buildings. You can slice and dice the numbers in lots of different ways, as you all know. But to us, the headlines are we need to work on our transportation system and drive more greenhouse gas emissions reductions through energy efficiency and renewables. And those are the two key things. Interestingly, Climate Action KC sponsored a large summit, I think 4 years ago. About 800 people came. Paul Hawken joined us as one of our speakers. And Paul's comment was, it kind of doesn't matter where you start because everything's connected to everything else. And begin with where your passion is, and that'll provide ample opportunity to drive change in a lot of different ways. And so I believe that's to be true, and it's reflected, I think, in our work. The modeling that we did from the inventory showed that, well, in 2050, in the business as usual case, that we would have 37 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents that we'd have to reduce. And of course, the business as usual case is probably no longer germane, but nonetheless, it's what we used during our planning process. And so how do we drive this to zero? And the first two blue bars around building energy efficiency and electricity generation really speak to this question of how do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with buildings. And the next big line is about transportation. So of course, we're talking about transit-oriented development, walking, biking, reducing VMT, talking about land use, 15-minute communities, those kinds of things. And the item around waste is much smaller, but of course that line could grow substantially bigger if you were looking at extended supply chains and so forth. And everything that we couldn't get in these first four categories, we put in a final box that we called sequestration. So can we put the final 6.5 million or so metric tons of CO2 equivalents in the ground through stream restoration, forest and prairie restoration, wetland restoration, regenerative agriculture? There's a lot of activity in all of those spheres right now. So moving on to trying to change screens, and my computer is locked. That's no good. There we go. On the climate risk and vulnerability side, we had done some downscale climate modeling in our community a few years back, and we recognized that there's three main natural hazards that would be exacerbated by climate change, which are drought, flood, and extreme heat. And we developed a socioeconomic stress index. This was adapted from the Centers for Disease Control. There's a lot of stuff like this out there now, like EPA's new EJ screen and other kinds of indices, geospatial indices that speak to climate risk and environmental justice. And here in Kansas City, right, you can begin to take this and you can focus in deeply on where there are most flood risks, where are heat islands most important, where might there be issues with food access or job access, and use that to drive policy and planning to address those particular issues. Our plan, here's all the different categories in the plan. Again, I would suggest that these are boilerplate kinds of things that you'd see in most of the plans. I want to just give you a sense of kind of the approach that we took. The first is, I already mentioned this question of collaboration and leadership. We had 1,000 people involved. We have over 100 different elected leaders who are providing support for this effort. We have untold numbers of stakeholders, architects and engineers, and urban food system folks, and transportation planners, and more, folks from our large electric utility and our municipal utilities, who are all trying to think creatively about what they could do. And inside of that, there's lots of room for collaboration to help drive change, especially in the federal moment that we're living in. And I'm locked again. So what maybe I will do is stop sharing. I apologize for my computer seizing up, and I'll just speak a little bit longer. So on the adaptation side, I've got a background in ecology and community planning, and I would argue that green infrastructure is the low-hanging fruit of climate adaptation, right? If we're concerned about heat islands and flood risks, we can deal with both of those while increasing real estate values and improving the walkability of our communities by planting more trees along our streets, all at the same time. We've got an effort with our largest utility of energy saving trees, planting trees in the southwest corner of residential lots that can reduce energy consumption by a fourth once those trees grow up. There's so many opportunities to make a difference there. That world intersects, of course, with worlds of watershed management and land use, comprehensive land use planning and more. And there's a lot of ways to make a big difference. Our urban agriculture movement in Kansas City is really vibrant. It's grown a lot. It continues to grow. During the height of the pandemic, maybe 1 in 4 households had food insecurity issues in Kansas City. And it might be back down to 1 in 8, but the levels of food insecurity are staggering. And so we're talking about access to fresh, nutritious food. There's lots of ways to get at that, among them through urban agriculture, partnerships and market-based opportunities between urban and rural areas, thinking about compost. That's one of the ones I love talking about. So that inside this plan, we're always looking for multi-benefit cross-sector solutions. And compost is just one of the best examples of this, right? So when you throw organics away in a landfill, you end up generating a lot of methane emissions, which are bad. If we compost, we're going to create maybe 6 to 8 times as many jobs as we would by just dumping stuff in the landfill. But at the same time, we're creating a product that turns our soils into sponges. So we're reducing flood risks, we're enhancing the vitality of our urban gardens and orchards, and we're sequestering carbon all at the same time, right? And so we have, as maybe 150,000 tons of food waste that goes into our landfills every year in Metro Kansas City. It's a big number. It's a really big number. And it's a wasted asset, one that we can use to help drive change, from job creation to environmental restoration and addressing food security all at the same time. So we're looking for ways to package stories that really hit in a number of different areas through ever more elegant kind of sustainability, multi-benefit, cross-sector kinds of solutions. One of the big challenges we have is we know that we want to work at a system level and think about system scale integration, but it's hard to manage at that level, right? None of our organizations and institutions are really structured in a way that lets us do that easily. And so that's a huge challenge for us. On the transportation side, we're just completing another round of transportation funding in Kansas City with all of the federal sub-allocated pots. And there's more complete street projects and more off-road trail projects than ever before. There's less capacity investment, and there's more focus on people, on walking and biking, and it's exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to do, and to try and figure out how those investments in turn relate to other community revitalization kinds of initiatives. So where are we now? The plan was adopted 1.5 years ago. We've entered a federal moment, right? And so there might be 15 different very substantial grant opportunities I'm familiar with, and I bet many of you are as well, right? Whether they come from HUD, DOE, EPA, DOT, or others. And we're trying to figure out, how do we build upon these partnerships and planning concepts that we've put together to begin executing. We formed a new policy committee at our agency. There are many other networks of folks, from a USGBC to urban food systems folks to the transit planning community and more, who are all galvanized and trying to figure out how can they move forward aggressively. And we're trying to help support those kinds of efforts however we can. And so we're moving aggressively into implementation. We're and just thrilled at the opportunity. One of the things that's stunning is 5 years ago, I would never have been in a position to make this presentation that I'm sharing with you today, right? We're in a different time. And we hope that the work we've done positions us well to we make continued progress. And it's time to write the next chapter. So I'll stop there and would be happy to entertain any questions.
Well, thank you, Tom. Appreciate that overview. Seems like probably a lot of lessons learned, about this process that I appreciate that you shared some of those. In looking at your presentation going through, one thing that jumped out to me, and which obviously comes out with any sort of climate action plan, is just the need to educate people about what we're talking about. And I saw one good example was the probability and consequences chart that you had. It was sort of red and various a gradient, and then it had the icons were included in there to show the different things. And I thought that kind of thing, like icons, it seems so small but can go so far in building like understanding with people. So did you guys find when you were starting out or throughout the process, I guess, would you find you were providing a lot of educational resources to kind of help people understand, what you're talking about with climate risks and benefits? Was that an important part of the process?
It sure was, right? I think one of the really huge pieces of value from our planning process was that it detoxified and demystified, these big words like climate change or decarbonize or, and we're saying we already know how to do this and we've already got a track record. And so this stuff isn't new, but what's new is the scale of the challenge and the scale of the opportunity. And so sometimes we found that you have to reframe an issue a little bit to make sure that you're aligned with the focus of your audience. It's fine. It doesn't really matter if you start with rural quality of life or drinking water supply or floodplain management or food security or cost savings and energy efficiency. Instead of climate risk and vulnerability, right? And so there were many times where maybe we found a need to reframe, but it ultimately seemed to take us to the same place and help strengthen the nature of the partnerships that we're trying to build.
Great. Yeah. Well, I imagine especially being, a regional organization that straddles state lines, right? Unless my geography is mixed up, it seems you have to have a very strong sense of how to build partnerships and keep them going, just as an organization, as Mark. So especially with something like a climate plan where maybe varying opinions on how to address things, partnerships even more important there. I know we're up on time here. This was a shorter webinar than maybe sometimes we usually do, but one final question I had, and if others have questions, feel free to ask them, but thinking about the process and the outcome itself, was there anything big that really surprised you about either what you sort of learned or what worked during the process or what you were able to come to in the outcome?
Maybe I'll comment on a couple things. We went into this with the idea of an 80% reduction by 2050. And I thought that's pretty hard. And a lot of people felt that it was really important to have these declarative, statements, these visions that were more aspirational. A net zero region by 2050. It surprised me that our board adopted that, but they did. I think the biggest challenge in front of us, I think it's national, is how do we really wrestle this question of linking environmental justice and climate resilience in ways that are meaningful, that have outcomes, that are genuinely rooted in diversity and inclusion, right, and social justice, and helping build communities, strengthen communities, and achieve real outcomes that we might all aspire to, but in ways that are contextually meaningful and appropriate. So in our planning process, I told you that most of our work was done online. The level of engagement we had with some parts of the community was absolutely inadequate. We tried hard, it wasn't good enough. And moving forward, how do we do better? And the part of the challenge now, right, with Justice 40 and $60 billion worth of environmental justice focused resources coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a time to try and, where we have to figure this thing out. And so it didn't surprise me exactly, but the nature of the conversation and just the complexity of the challenge is flat out daunting. And it's one that we're trying to wrestle with the best we can.
Yeah, I think that's certainly not unique to this effort too, right? So it's nearly all efforts. And I think part of it is just so much that people need to focus on, especially right now. It's hard to bring focus to some of these plans we're doing, right? But I think we'll keep working on doing that and improving it. Well, thank you again. I know we're at time here, so we'll close out. But as I had noted, this is recorded. I did fail to bring up the contact slide that I had, so let me pull that up here very briefly while we're closing out. But we'll have this up on our awards website, APA-SCD.com/awards. So we'll get the recording up by tomorrow. Feel free to reach out to Tom, who's just put his email in the chat. It's also on the slide here. If you have questions about the Kansas City Regional Climate Action Plan, and of course, please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the awards. But thank you to those who attended today and those who watched the recording, and hope to see you next time. Thank you again, Tom.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation.
Bye.
Bye.